Ladies and gentlemen, today I have the pleasure to welcome Professor Gregory Harms under the Human Rights Tree. And Professor Gregory is an independent scholar, a professor of philosophy, and author. Among his books, we can cite the Palestine-Israeli conflict, a basic introduction. Another book is Stress Power Concept in the Middle East, U.S. Foreign Policy, Israel, and World History. His latest book is No Politics, No Religion, How America's Code of Conduct. But for the purpose of our conversation today, we're just going to discuss about his book, The Palestine-Israel Conflict, a basic introduction, and trying to figure out whether there is a way to peaceful solution when it comes to the conflict. Professor Gregory Harms, thank you very much for joining me under the Human Rights Tree.
No, thank you for having me.
As I said, I would like to discuss the Palestine-Israel conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But before going too deep into that subject, would you mind just tell me a little bit about you and your background?
I suppose on paper, I'm a professor of philosophy at 3 Chicago area institutions. Maybe not on paper. I'm an independent scholar. I don't work in conjunction with those 3 institutions, but I've been doing my own work since about 2002, I suppose, studying U.S. foreign policy as it applies to the Middle East, and specifically the Palestine-Israel conflict. I've done 3 books on the Middle East topic, and then a subsequent volume on domestic American politics and the issue of religion and so on and so forth. So that's been most of my time over the last 20 some years, has been doing research and writing, and then doing, teaching philosophy on the side. So that's taken up most of my time.
So are you from Illinois?
Yes, I'm from Illinois, born and raised in Chicago, or in Joliet, and I lived in Chicago for a number of years.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Lewis University. I studied philosophy, and then I did a graduate master's degree in philosophy. I chipped away at my PhD at Loyola in Chicago.
Okay.
And then I decided that that wasn't going to pan out, that I wasn't going to get a job teaching philosophy. So I went to art school and wanted to be a painter.
Okay.
If you can explain that decision to me, I'd love to hear it.
Mm. So were you born a scholar, or you just happened to follow that path?
No, I fell into it, really. I prior to my work on these topics, I was a graphic designer and something of a starving artist, I suppose. But I started studying history very generally, Chinese history actually, and then at first, and then I got into the Middle East, and then 9/11 happened, and then everything changed. That's
Okay.
when I got really. My initial ambition was I was going to write an extended essay on everything I knew about in the Middle East, about Palestine-Israel, about I was gonna write an extended essay and self-publish it and give it away at Christmas, this kind of thing. You know, that was my initial ambition. I had a friend of mine talk me into a much larger project, which became the first book.
I see.
So I
So,
like to joke that that this friend of mine helped ruin my life. You know,
so what happened to your path to art? In some way, you wanted to be an artist, but you end up being a philosopher. What happened to it? Or are you
uh,
still a artist?
well,
Um,
no, I was studying philosophy first, and then I ended up in art school,
okay,
and I just kind of fell in love with graphic design, and that's what I was doing. It was paying the bills, you know.
okay.
Painting was never gonna was gonna pay the bills,
Mm,
but graphic design, you could eke out a living doing that. So that's what I was doing. But I was doing visual arts
mm,
on the side all the while, you know, painting and drawing and so on and so forth. But that was just more for personal, you know,
yeah.
exploration, I guess.
S-
And then I landed, and then this scholarship thing just sort of I just sort of landed in it.
Okay. Are you still doing paintings or on the
No,
side?
no, sadly, the scholarly endeavors take up all of my time. So, you know, that and teaching philosophy. No,
Okay,
I don't have a spare minute to, you know, I'd love to. Maybe when I retire,
okay.
I'll
So,
paint
with your
again.
credentials, you have the capability to work on different topics.
Mhm.
However, you end up choosing the Palestine and Israel conflict.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Um, I guess what initially motivated me was, or what sparked my interest initially, was I was frustrated that I didn't know anything about it. You know, people said all kinds of things about it, like, "Oh, you'll never understand it. They've been fighting for, you know, since the Bible and blah blah blah," and all
Okay,
this stuff. I thought to myself, that can't be right, but I didn't know. Maybe it was right. It just didn't feel right. So I started reading a lot of books on the subject. I just kind of buried myself. I immersed myself in the literature, in the historical literature, and yeah, lo and behold, I quickly discovered that everybody that everybody was wrong.
I see.
um, that that they hadn't been fighting for thousands of years. That it wasn't that complicated. Like everything I was hearing repeatedly was not correct. You could summarize this conflict. You could explain it to, you know, a 10-year-old. You know, it's not that complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, yes. And there's a long history now. And there's a lot of moving parts in that history. Yes. But the basics you could explain to a 10-year-old.
I
No
see.
problem. No
But
problem.
as you say, you study the issue because you didn't know much
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, I
And
was very frustrated with my own ignorance. Yeah.
I see. But can you take us to the steps? When was it? When did you, uh, when was the different step you took basically to learn about it? After learning, deciding, well, you will further your knowledge about the issue, and at a certain point, you say, "I'm going to write about it." Can you take us to those different steps?
Um, well, I like I said, I was reading a lot about the history at the time, and then 9/11 happened,
Okay.
and then I was, you know, I was getting a lot of emails from friends because they knew that I was
Mm,
obsessed with this history, you know. So they kept emailing me, these friends, like, what does this have to do with this? Who's this guy? Who's this guy? You know, blah, blah, blah. And I started writing these emails, and the emails got longer, and I started writing the same email over
Okay.
and over and over again. And I'm like, that's when I got the idea to write this essay.
Okay.
That never happened. It turned into a
So,
book.
so the book started with an essay.
Yeah, I was going to write that essay. I was going to self-publish it. And
Okay.
I thought, all right, yeah, that'll be good. I'll just write this essay and I'll self-publish it and I'll just give it away at Christmas or something. I'm like, here you go. Here's everything I know.
Okay.
And
About the conflict.
hopefully this will help, you know.
What was your book of reference? What book did you read that really enlightened you about the conflict
Oh my God,
before you
that's
start
there's
writing your own book?
there's a number of bookshelves you can't see right now. It's off the camera. They are
Okay.
off the camera. That's a very long list. If you go through the bibliography at the back of the book,
Mm.
that'll sort
I
of
will.
indicate. I mean, there are some scholars that
Mm.
I think do superb work, no doubt. And they were influential, but I mean, you're talking about really hundreds of books, you
Yeah.
know.
Can you
Uh,
just cite a few scholars, or a few book, like one or two or
right off the
three?
top of my head, I would say at the time, Edward Said,
Okay.
who was a Palestinian scholar,
Mm.
lived in the United States for the later part of his life. Um, yeah, Edward Said was a tremendous scholar. Noam Chomsky,
Okay.
always, I mean, always an influence.
Mm.
Has had a profound intellectual impact on me. Rashid Khalidi, he does very good work. He's at Columbia in New York, I believe. He was at University of Chicago, but he left. I think he's at Columbia. Um, Rashid Khalidi does very good work. There's a number of Palestinian scholars. There's a number of Israeli scholars. Avi Shlaim, there's one. Um, there's a number of journalists that I found influential as well. You know, Ilan Pappé, that's another Israeli scholar. He's another Israeli scholar whose work I found to be first rate. Yeah, there's a number of them. I could go on for quite a
Okay.
while.
But in the process of writing the book,
Yeah,
what was the strategy? Did you happen to go in the region before you start writing, or you just um, base
I
your
made
researches on
I made a
books and
few
write?
trips to the
Okay.
region. I did one early on, my first trip in 2002.
Okay.
I thought, well, if I'm going to write about it, I better go see it. You know, I didn't want to be a writer who, you know, I had, for me, I needed that credibility. I felt like a fraud if I had never, if I'm writing about this conflict and I'd never seen it, you know.
Okay.
So it was just a matter of integrity
Mm.
that I get on an airplane and go see it for myself. And then I went again in 2005 and 2006. Stayed in the region for about 2.5 months. Stayed in the West Palestinian West Bank for about a month. Actually, precisely a month. Um, yeah, I've returned a few times. I just I just want to see what's going on. I want to kind of update for myself, my own sense of things, and I want to see friends, you know, people I haven't seen for years. I want to go and see them again. You know, you make a lot of friends in the Arab world. You make friends very quickly. It's a very hospitable, warm, friendly culture. So you make friends like takes you minutes, you know.
Okay. During your trip, did you have the chance to visit both sides and learn? Can you just take us through the trip? when you went there, what did you learn? How was the people and how was the environment?
I've been to, I mean, I've traveled a bit in Israel proper. I mean,
Okay,
Tel Aviv, West Jerusalem. But I'm not particularly interested in this in Israel. I'm interested in the occupation, and
okay,
therefore I'm interested in the Palestinian territories. That's where I spend the bulk of my time when I'm there. Visiting Gaza, spending a significant amount of time in the West Bank. Um, yeah, that's where I want to be. I want to see how they're living, how what they're subjected to. My focus is the occupation, as it should be. If I visited, South Africa in the 1990s, I would have gone to the Bantustans. I would have gone to the homelands, and I wouldn't have cared too much about the rest of South Africa. I want to see what's going on, and
but
the poverty and the occupations, what's going on.
as a scholar, um, you, is it not helpful to basically um, go in both sides and make observation to come up through a balanced conclusion?
I think I spent enough time in Israel to get a sense of Israeli culture and the people, and eat in
Okay.
the restaurants.
Mm.
You make friends and so on. Um, but the like I said, the focus of my trips was to see what's going on in the occupation.
Okay.
If you're sitting in a cafe in Tel Aviv, you don't get a sense. I mean, it's very strange. When you're in Israel proper,
Mm.
they talk about the Palestinian territories like they're on the moon. They're disconnected. They don't. There's no sense as to what's going on in their own backyard. You know,
I
and
see.
the horrors that exist. In Gaza and the West Bank. Um, yeah, I talked to any number of Israelis, and I'd mentioned, oh, we're going to Gaza tomorrow, and they just look at you like, why on earth would you go there?
Mm.
They just look at you like you're out of your mind, you know. And they talk about the conflict, like I said, like it's the dark side of the moon. It's like they have no sense. I'm like, it's right over there.
I see.
Nothing's far away when you're there. I mean, it's a very small place. Um, Israel in totality is about the size of New Jersey. This is not a big place. Um, and the Israeli people talk about it like it's this
Something.
on a different planet, and I found that astounding.
I see.
I mean, your military is lording over an entire population right over there.
Mm.
No, that it's not on their, it's not, it doesn't exist like that in the Israeli imagination. It,
I
do-
see.
I'm being very general, but that was my experience again and again and again and again. They know what's going on. They see it on the news, but there's a disconnect. To
I see.
them, it's like I said, a different planet.
Eventually, you did your research. You went there to
Yeah.
see the fact by yourself, and you end up writing a book calling it the Palestine-Israel conflict,
Hmm.
a basic introduction. Why
Yeah.
the title?
I just wanted to be as clear as I could possibly be. I wasn't looking for like a provocative or jazzy title. I just wanted to be, as I try to be throughout the book, I try to be as clear as humanly possible. You
Okay.
know, I try to stay away from opinions. I try to keep my personality out of the frame. I just I just wanted to produce a book,
Mm.
quite frankly, that I wanted to write the book that I myself was trying to find at one point. That's largely why I wrote it. When I took interest in this particular conflict, um, I I was in bookstores and libraries, and I'm like, come on, there's got to be a 200-page short paperback book that holds my hand, walks me in the shallow end, and explains this conflict. And I couldn't find it. And I thought, how can that possibly be? It's in the news every day, you know. I mean,
Mm.
there are huge books on the topic. Those are hard. You can find those, huge, scholarly tomes on a particular aspect of the conflict. But what I was looking for was just this, short paperback that explains what's going on, and I couldn't find it. And I found that flooring that I couldn't find this book. I'm like, how can that be? There's like thousands of books on this topic. And like I said, I mean, there are scholarly books. Those are, you can find those, that are 700 pages long, and there's 4 or 5 inches of footnotes on every page. That's fine. You can find those, but that's not what I needed at the time. What I needed at the time was a primer, was an introduction. And that's what I ended up writing because I couldn't find a bloody thing.
I
You
see.
know? Yeah.
My impression that, going through the process of writing this book, you were guided by simplicity. You wanted things to be very simple so
Yes.
people can have understanding of the conflict. And,
Yes.
so I feel like this. I'm going to try to dive into the book. If I'm
Okay.
not mistaken, you started the book with an introduction.
Mhm.
What was the introduction about?
The introduction is just to familiarize the reader with the region and the vocabulary. What's an Arab? What's Islam? How many countries are in the Middle East? What does that mean? How many people live there? This kind of stuff. It's just sort of familiarizing the reader with the region.
I see.
Let's start with where it is, which many Americans, I mean, I'm in the presence of college students 5 days a week, and I can tell you for a fact that you start talking about the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, they don't even know what that is. Though they don't even know what those are.
Mm.
So you got to start with where these places are.
Okay.
So that was my ambition in the introduction, is to just explain these very basic fundamental things, and then also, what's an Arab, what's a Muslim, this kind of stuff, because many of my fellow Americans don't know. They don't know. They don't know the difference between an Arab and a Muslim.
I see.
You got to
Oh,
start there. You got to start very basic.
in that journey, you started with part one, talking about background history.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the background history of the Palestine-Israeli conflict?
Well, um, it really has its the it has its foundations in the confluence of three factors, really. A developing Palestinian nationalism, um, British colonial ambitions, and what is called Zionism. Zionism is a political school of thought that, uh, the idea is to establish a Jewish homeland because many Jews, many Zionist Jews at the time, this is the late 19th century, they were looking to get out of Russia and Poland and start a life someplace else, you know. So they looked all over the place, parts of Africa, and they thought, well, Jerusalem, that's easier to sell that. So they landed on Palestine. But there's a problem. There's Palestinians in Palestine, you know. So
So,
you got these you got this confluence of three factors that do not they work across purposes, you know. You can't harmonize Zionist national ambitions, a burgeoning Palestinian sense of nationality, and British colonialism. So you got to get rid of at least one or two of those. Those form a very volatile admixture, and that really set that part of the world on a collision course. You know,
so who are the Palestinians?
the Palestinians are Middle Eastern Arabs. There's a lot of discussion about who was there first, the Jews or the Palestinians, or the Palestinian Arabs. The answer is both. They can both trace lineage back to Canaan, which has nothing to do with this particular conflict. But if you want to have that conversation, fine. They can both trace their lineage. Each can trace his or her lineage um, back to original Canaanite populations. The Palestinians are sort of a mixture of original Canaanite stock and then later Arab populations that moved north from the Arab Peninsula, what is now Saudi Arabia. Um, so they're kind of a hybrid, I guess you might say. Um, but fast forward to the 21st century, the Palestinians are, you know, they're considered an Arab group, an Arab culture, mostly Muslim. Um, and I've had the good fortune to get to know them pretty well over the years. Multiple trips to the region, spent time with families, and it's a lovely, hospitable, warm culture. Also, I should add, it's very funny. The Palestinian sense of humor is one that I really enjoy, and the Arab sense of humor in general is one that I I'm sorry, there's a bit of yeah, I think I have a visitor. Um so um yeah, their sense of humor is um is something I really appreciate. I know that kind of maybe is going wide of your question, but yeah.
Mm. So, what is the historical relationship between the Jewish and the Palestinian?
The historical relationship?
Yeah,
Well,
are
there's
they
that, like I said,
brothers
that
or?
there's a they're on a collision course as of the late 19th century, early 20th century. Um, they're they're working at cross purposes. The Palestinians want their own country, which most of their neighbors got their own country, except the British wanted to maintain a colonial foothold in Palestine. Excuse me, Palestine was never allowed full, sovereignty. So the Palestinians have this developing sense of nationalism. They want their own country, just like everybody else got their own country. And then you get this massive influx of Zionist Jews pouring into what is called mandatory Palestine. And then the UN steps in and awards the majority of the country to a minority of the population, that is Zionist Jews. And then a war broke out, and that's 1948, you know. So they were on a collision course very early on in the history of Palestine. But that's not to suggest in any way that the conflict is religious in nature, that there's some kind of inherent or some kind of blood feud that exists between Jews and Muslim Palestinians. That's preposterous. The problem with Palestine, the problem with now Israel is Zionist ambitions and Palestinian desires for a state, for their own homeland, which the UN gave away, and then Israel has occupied since 1967. That's the source of conflict. That's where it comes from. It's not religious at all. You know,
But
religion religion gets brought up a lot when you're talking about the Middle East. And I even wrote a book called It's Not About Religion. I just thought I should hit that topic right on the head. It's Yes, there is instability and violence in the Middle East. I don't think that's a secret. But is it religious based? No, not one iota. These are political ambitions. These are based on decisions based on power. And the United States has a lot to answer for the violence and the instability that exists in the Middle East. So do the British and the French. But as of, post World War II, post 1945, you know, the Americans stepped in for the British and the French, and they've been the regional, what's called hegemon ever since, Yeah.
but um, focusing on the background history,
hmm
we can acknowledge that both Palestinians and Israeli were living under the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah,
How
right.
was life then?
You mean before the Aliyah, before the Zionist?
Yeah, how was
Oh,
the
they lived, yeah, there was no conflict then. But in Ottoman Palestine, before the before the Western European powers divided up the region into what became the nation states that we know as Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq. Um, yeah, the the view of their view of themselves was, we're Ottoman subjects,
what?
and Jews lived in that area, and it wasn't really wasn't much of an issue.
Okay, in your part two, pre-conflict,
Yeah,
you talk about the Jewish persecution.
the
What
Jewish what?
persecution?
Yeah.
How did you analyze the factor of the Jews was persecuted during the and they have been subjected to persecution for many years, and they was
You mean
uh,
in Russia, the
no,
pogroms?
I'm talking about
Or do you mean World War II?
yes, I'm talking
Oh,
about the history because in many cases, in many countries in Europe. Jews was persecuted because
Yeah,
in many cases they accused them of being the people who killed Christ, and they was persecuted
yeah.
for that.
Right, right,
And
right, right.
further, there was a genocide um, against them. There was genocide during the Second War. How what did you find out during your studies related to that topic that you mentioned, Jews persecution and Zionism?
I talk about the pogroms and I talk about the persecution that the early Zionists and those Jewish populations suffered under, um, suffered in Eastern Europe, you know.
Mm,
Uh, and I talk a little bit, I talk very briefly about the World War II experience.
okay,
It simply because it's not that I don't think it's important. I just don't think it has much to do with the Palestine-Israel conflict. You know, the 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 World War II experience and the destruction of European Jews, I don't think that has much to do with the conflict at all. I mean, what they suffered um, in Russia and Poland, yes, that inspired them to want to leave and develop a homeland, which is the essence of Zionism. That does kind of start the narrative. But what happened in World War II, I don't think so. I don't think that has much to do with it at all. I mean, it does there are some knock-on effects about, populations, Jewish populations leaving Arab states, heading for Israel, it changing the demographic in Israel. There are some, like I said, knock-on effects, but it doesn't really dovetail into the conflict itself proper. So I don't spend a whole lot of time. I do talk about the Nazis and all that stuff in the book, but it's like a page or two, you know. It doesn't really, and I got fairly hostile emails about that. It's not, but I want to make it clear that it's not because I don't think it's important. I just don't think it has much to do with the conflict.
I see. But going through uh, the history of Jews, with knowing that they have been persecuted, can we kind of drive from that on the notion that the Zionist is saying that they deserve to have their own state because everywhere they go, they has been persecuted. Is it a justification? The
Uh,
horror they went through justify for them is
well, I
not
think the
a
problem
justification for
with
them to.
Palestine is that they wanted their own state, but they wanted the existing populations to kind of get out of the way. And so wanting your own state's well and good, but if your ambitions are statehood at the expense of somebody else, that's unjustifiable. You know,
I see.
you wanna start your own state, you can go right ahead, but there was already a population, there was already a vibrant culture living in Palestine at the time. And the Israelis have made it very clear in 1948, in 1967, that their ambitions, their rejectionist position regarding diplomacy across decades of diplomacy, what's called the peace process. They've rejected one proposal after another, after another, after another, after another. And it's very clear why. They want that land and they want the Palestinians to leave. They've wanted the Palestinians to leave for quite a long time. A scholarly interpretation of the June 67 war is that they just finished the job. They finished the job. They finished what was an ambition in 1948. And 20 years later, they just, okay, we'll just militarily take control over it. And then they're doing the same thing that was done to the Jews in Russia and Poland. You know,
But
the attitude there was, you know, 1/3 will die, 1/3 will leave, and 1/3 will learn how to blend in. And I don't see any difference in Israeli behavior. You know, what we're seeing in Gaza Strip right now. Smashing over half of the buildings, killing tens of thousands of people. It's pretty clear what they want. They want the people in Gaza to leave. Just go. You know, former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin said, best case scenario, Gaza Strip just breaks and falls into the Mediterranean. They don't want that. Real estate, there's nothing there. I've been there. It's just sand. But you know, as Donald Trump's son-in-law was very quick to point out, they could really do something with that waterfront property.
let's see. In your
So step one is to get rid of the population. Just make life so unbearable that they pour into the Sinai Peninsula.
in your book, you
There is no step
tackle.
two. What's that?
I say in your book on part 3, you tackle the conflict.
Yeah.
Many of the scholars basically see this conflict as a very complex one, and based on your writing, can you basically, in a simplistic way, like your goal on writing the big, how can you explain the conflict related to partition, Israel statehood, and the 6 Days War?
Well, like I said, the 6-Day War was, you know, a completion of what the Israelis set out to achieve in 1948. You know, they expanded what had been given to them by the UN to 56% and so what's left is the 22%, 22% of Palestine, that is the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. That's 22% left of what existed as Palestine before. And then what divides Israel from the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip is called the Green Line. And the Green Line is the diplomatic sort of point of departure. The 6-Day War, Israel took over everything beyond the Green Line and now maintains a military occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. And it has since 1967. So that is the core of the Palestine-Israel conflict, is dealing with what Israel maintaining a military occupation of those 3 territories. And they do so to this day.
So basically, you are saying that the UN, when they proclaimed the partition and Israel statehood, Palestine was representing only 20%.
Say it again.
I'm coming back
Alpha?
to the partition.
Yeah.
When the fact, what was the percentage when they divided the region into 2 states?
The UN divided the country into, I mean, it didn't shake out into 50-50, but it was like roughly 50-50. And then after the 1948 war, Israel expanded its control to to everything but the 22%.
Okay.
You know,
To that, I may trying to share views because many people consider that when there was partition, both sides should accept it, but it was not the case. Um, Arabs country got together and attacked Israel.
yeah,
Is it the case?
that Israel should reformulate your question, Alpha.
I'm saying, but during the partition,
Yeah,
you said it, it was quite 50-50.
it was the what ended up Israeli. They declared statehood in May of 1948. What the UN gave them was 56%. Then they expanded that for that 56% to 78% in the 48 war.
Yes, I'm coming to that.
Leaving 22%. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm discussing now that war because if we go to historical record, the war was started by Arab countries. Isn't it the case?
The Palestinians, I mean, there's sort of a mythology about all these Arab states converging on Israel and Israel defeating all these Arab states. They didn't field that many soldiers. It was
But
mostly Palestinians. It was mostly Palestinians that did the fighting, and they just got over half of their country handed to somebody else. So you can imagine, you can understand the grievances. But then
just
why would you expand the 56% to 78%?
people to try to explain to answer to your questions.
Yeah,
We may say that um, going to a war have a price. When you indulge on fighting and you are defeated, often throughout history, you have to pay a price. Many may say um, the Arab nation attacked Israel and
yeah.
Israel defend himself and they won. So the price of winning is to occupy more territory. People may see it that way. And many people also have that tendency to justify that occupation in that side. Because throughout today, for instance, if we have American bases in Japan, we have American bases in Germany, because those countries were defeated during the war. And other people also will say, um, basically, if the Arab won the war, perhaps Israel will not exist. So, in a many way, there are views that say they won the war, and for the price, they occupy those lands. What do you think about those views?
I think those views are illegitimate.
Okay.
If you fast forward to 1967,
Mm.
when Israel, finished the job from 1948, the UN Security Council passed a resolution 242, and it was signed by all members of the Security Council, the United States included. And what it says in the UN 242 is it talks about the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory due to war. That's a quote from UN 242. So to expand, to get into a war with, and the Palestinians didn't start 67, to enter into warfare with your neighbors and then expand your control into a military occupation is against international law. It's against international law. So the occupation that Israel is carrying out right now, which is the source of the conflict, is in contravention of international law.
Let's see. You went there and live in occupied territory for months. How the situation look like for people? Can you describe us the situation for people who didn't have the chance to be there and are seeing the conflict from far through their TV?
Um, it's you can't go anywhere. You can't go from town to town without going through a checkpoint, which means there are soldiers from a foreign military telling you when you can and can't go to the neighboring town to see your grandmother or to get medical care or to give birth or whatever it is you're going to do in that neighboring town. You're at the mercy of foreign soldiers who answer to no one and who hold you in contempt.
So you mean if somebody is traveling inside Gaza or inside the West Bank, he need a permission, or it's just between Gaza and West Bank? Which
No,
one?
there are checkpoints all over the West Bank.
Or
You get
inside?
inside the West Bank, yeah. Israel maintains checkpoints all over the West Bank. You can't go anywhere. You can't go from one town to the other without going through a checkpoint. And the soldiers will close that checkpoint at their convenience, and then it's closed. Then you don't go anywhere.
So
You
do
wait.
you think the two states solution is a myth, or is it a myth or is it a reality? Because many people think that
Is it a
there is
what? Is it a what?
is it a
No.
myth? A myth.
Oh, myth. No, I think the two-state solution is the realistic diplomatic point of departure. I mean,
Okay.
people at the progressive end of the spectrum, I guess, they've been announcing the death of the two-state solution. They've been saying it for 20 years. Um, yes, Israel's expanding settlements in the West Bank. That is, they're developing places for Israelis to live in the West Bank. Further evidence of just how badly they want that real estate. They want the Palestinians to leave. They want the Palestinians to get out of the way, and they're building settlements. So yes, they are expanding settlements in the West Bank. That doesn't mean the two-state solution's a goner. The two-state solution has the support of the major world powers. It has the support of the UN. It has the support of international law. It has the support of the United States. It has the support of China and Russia and, you know, France and England and whoever else, That's where you start. And I think it could feasibly, just because we haven't seen success on that front doesn't mean it's not a workable solution. It's a workable solution. We've seen diplomacy come close in years previous, after Camp David too, in the year 2000, conducted by former American President Bill Clinton, former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and the late Palestinian Authority President Yasser Arafat. Right after, I mean, that was sort of a charade, but after Camp David too, there was Bill Clinton in a very informal meeting in the White House with the principal negotiators from each delegation. Um, he issued what's called the Clinton parameters. And the Clinton parameters were then taken to Taba in Egypt. And, there was another week-long round of negotiations canceled by the Israelis, by Ehud Barak. But that's kind of the high watermark. And then the Saudis issued a proposal in 2002, full, withdraw from West Bank, withdraw from Gaza, and we will normalize relations with Israel. The Arabs have offered again and again and again and again to work with the Israelis, just get out of the West Bank and Gaza. But no, Israel wants to hang on to the West Bank and Gaza. I want to hang on to West Bank more, but if they can get the Gazans to leave, well, that's fine. Waterfront property again. We're back to. And then there are a number after the Saudis gave their proposal, they reissued that proposal in 2007. And then you had a number of independent sort of, what you might call back channel proposals, People's Voice and the Geneva Accords. And they're all promising proposals. So I think reasonable diplomacy could work, but Israel has been a rejectionist since 1967. They've rejected one diplomatic proposal after another, after another, after another, and the Americans prevent it. I mean, the Americans just recently vetoed a resolution at the Security Council at the UN denying the Palestinians full statehood. Why? Why did they do that? Well, I know why they did it. It's why the Palestinians don't have a state, because the Americans prevent it from happening with Israeli help. They want to prevent, they want regional stability. If there's a Palestinian state, it changes the regional, changes the balance of power in the region. The Americans have always been has stood in opposition to democracy. So some small insignificant country, like the Palestinians, want their own country, then maybe somebody else gets a funny idea, and that's called the domino effect in diplomatic circles. So you want to prevent democracy. The United States wants to preserve and encourage Israeli militancy. So they want the Israelis to, they're kind of there as a regional junkyard dog. And that's their job. Their job is to be militant and aggressive and violent and to do Uncle Sam's bidding. And then fourth, we could say that the Palestinians serve as they're useful. They can be used as leverage. So if Uncle Sam wants something from an Arab state actor, then they can use what appears to be diplomacy. They can do something slightly nice for the Palestinians, and then that's appreciated on the part of the Arab world, and then Uncle Sam can get what he wants. So there's a kind of a utilitarianism, I guess, in play there as well. So I'd say those four are key considerations: regional stability, prevention of democracy, Israeli militancy, and Palestinian utility. I think those four we need to pay very close attention to. And I think that explains why we saw the veto the other day.
So based on your scholarly work, what are the steps we must take to come to the solution of two statehood, living together in peace?
Well, that's up to the Americans and the Israelis, and mostly up to the Americans, how hard they want to lean on the Israelis. It's up to the Americans. The
But
Americans could turn this off tomorrow.
in the other side, many Israeli may said there is a political movement such as Hamas, who is who have in his constitution the alienation of their nation. This can be an issue. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Hamas is a resistance movement. And I think Israel, I don't think, I know, Israel helped fund and get Hamas started in 1988. And furthermore, Israel looks the other way when Qatar, is siphoning money to Hamas. Iran gets all the credit, but no one pays much attention to what Qatar is doing. And Qatar is probably doing a lot more than Iran's doing. We're supporting Hamas. Into the bargain, in 2014, Hamas was basically out of the picture in Gaza. They were going to swear in a new technocratic, quote unquote, technocratic government to maintain governance in Gaza, and the Israelis didn't want this. So, now we have Hamas in charge of Gaza again. So, if Israel doesn't like Hamas, it can stop supporting it because it's been supporting it. It's
Okay.
been supporting it since day one.
How did they support Hamas?
Furthermore,
Mm.
Hamas is, like I said, a resistance movement. And any number of former Israeli intelligence elites and former Israeli military elites have come out and said unequivocally the reason that Israel has security concerns is because of the occupation. No Hamas, no, excuse me, no occupation, no Hamas. The reason Hamas even exists is because of the occupation. If Palestine was allowed to develop, its own terms freely, openly, Gaza could be, a paradise. It could be a vacation destination. It could be a really impressive place. You don't get organizations like Hamas just because they're bored. People in Hamas didn't just wake up one morning and decide, oh, let's murder Jews. No, that's not how it works. You make a large number of people desperate and angry and fearful and humiliated, and a tiny number, a teaspoon out of a swimming pool, will really let you know about it. And that's terrorism. It's not
Many
surprising.
many people see the issue of Palestine and Israel as complicated because they view there is a view that said even if there will be peace between Palestine and Israel, when that peace is settled, there will be internal conflict, like we witnessed between Hamas and the PLO. And most of the people think it's even inside Israel, they are the right wings and the left wings that may get into fight if there if there is not conflict. How can you explain that those views?
I don't I don't see the legitimacy of those views. I don't. So we shouldn't work towards peace because the Palestinians might there might be an internal conflict with the Palestinians.
No, it's not that thing. Is like
I don't buy it. I
is
just
the
don't buy it.
reason many people see this the conflict as very complicated issue because one of
I
your
don't.
main main goals is to
Yeah,
bring simplicity to the conflict.
yeah.
And many view there is internal division among even those states based on views and positions, and that may one day emerge even when there are peace between those two states.
I think that, well, I don't know if I agree with the premise.
Mm,
Um, I don't think the conflict is that complicated at all. And
okay,
secondly, I think we need to think about how ordinary day-to-day millions of Palestinians are forced to live. And
mm,
then start there. And we can speculate about what's going to happen on the other side of final status diplomatic solution, but we need to think first and foremost about how people are living.
I see.
And then we can speculate about, you know,
Yeah.
Palestinian politics, but we don't speculate about Palestinian politics first.
Mm,
You know, you worry about that when you get there, you know.
I see.
And I don't think it's that complicated. I don't think it's
Yeah.
complicated at all.
Yeah. You wrote your book and trying to bring the light to the conflict. But recently, we witnessed October 6th, what's happened, and the
Yeah,
consequences of those actions in
yeah,
the ground. And today, we quite witnessing um, a conflict between Iran and
yeah,
Israel.
yes.
How do you perceive all those factors, new factors, into um, what is your view on those factors into today conflict?
My view regarding Hamas is really no different than the view of the former Israeli, heads of intelligence and the military elites I mentioned earlier. My view is the same as theirs. The reason Hamas exists is because of the conflict, because of the occupation. If you don't like Hamas, you don't like terrorism, you don't like security threats, well, stop the occupation.
But do you think is a legitimate thing to target civilians?
No, I don't think terrorism is legitimate, but I think it's unsurprising. Just like the former Israeli heads of intelligence and the heads of the military, they're not surprised by it either. You don't like Hamas? Stop the occupation. It's that simple. It's not more complicated than that. As for Iran and Israel, that invites a broader discussion about U.S. foreign policy. Uh, Iran's been a regional boogeyman since 1979, and there's been kind of what's been labeled a shadow war going on between Israel and Iran for years now. Kind of this low grade, low intensity tit for tat, you know, with Iranian proxies and cyber attacks and so on and so forth. And the only thing new is that now it's become hot. It's become explicit. It's become overt. Israel rained hundreds of attack drones and ballistic missiles and cruise missiles on Israel. Israel was able to uh, meet that threat head on, but it had a lot of help from the Americans and the British and the French and the Jordanians. And they had a lot of heads up. It was a very calculated move on the part of the Iranians.
I see.
And then last night we just saw that Israel has responded to that and has attacked Isfahan in Iran. And no, I don't know how much the level of detail is. I read as much as I could last night, but I
Mm.
haven't read anything this morning about, so we'll see how much more information's come in.
So,
But
are you in? in touch with your friends who live in Gaza or in West Bank right now? And
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Yeah, West Bank, yeah.
what is the mood?
Well, the Palestinians are absolutely devastated by, emotionally, psychologically by what's going on in Gaza, you
Mm,
know. I haven't talked to anybody in Gaza in a long time,
I see.
but yeah, that the mood is, and then there's a lot of violence in the West Bank too,
I see.
you know, settlers committing acts of violence, the military looking the other way, sometimes the military being indirectly involved in those acts of violence.
Mm,
Um, yeah, it's a very bad situation for the Palestinians.
I see. I'm going to ask my last question.
Yeah.
Um, you come up with a conclusion in your book. I would love to hear a view of in your conclusion. And do you think there is a way to peace in this conflict?
Well, the conclusion in the book addresses some sort of uh maybe ancillary, not ancillary, it's not the right word. Maybe sort of leftover, if that's the right word. Uh, Subjects that I didn't get to cover at the later pages of the book. Issues about Gaza, issues about, what the Palestinians are living with. So I just wanted to like discuss those issues. I don't have like a grand ta-da, like
Mm,
conclusion to the book. Do I think peace is possible? Absolutely, peace is always possible. It's
mm,
just that the Americans have no interest in it because Israel's doing its job. Biden's made it clear that he's not happy, but that doesn't stop the weaponry being shipped, and that doesn't stop the diplomatic support at the UN. So he can grumble all he wants. The Israeli prime minister knows that it's still a green light,
I
even
see.
though the American president's grumbling. But I think the American people have a lot to say about it, and the American people can influence these decisions. That's uncontroversial. It's just if the American people cared about this, Washington would get the signal.
I see.
They would.
Professor Gregory Harms, again, thank you very much for joining me
No,
under
my pleasure, Alpha.
under the
My
human
pleasure.
rights tree.
Yeah, I enjoyed
And,
this. Yeah.
and I'm just wondering if people want to read about your books, for instance, the Palestine and Israeli conflict, um, basic introduction. Where should they go to get your book?
They can go to Amazon or they can, there's a link on my website. You can go to gregoryharms.com
Mm,
and find information about the books there. Yeah, for sure.
okay. I will remind also people your new book is no
No
politics.
politics, no religion.
Yeah, how America codes of conduct. Hopefully, in the near future, you can give us the opportunity to go through that book, have a discussion about it.
No,
Mm,
I would enjoy that, Alpha. Let me know. Yeah.
okay. Again, thank you very much for joining me on the Human Rights Tree.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.